Hey guys, tonight we slip into a story that feels like walking barefoot on broken glass, but in slow motion, with a strange kind of beauty. Picture this: the smell of champagne in the air, silk dresses brushing against polished floors, and me, once upon a time, standing at the edge of it all, watching my husband smile as he slipped a ring onto someone else's finger. Yeah, spoiler alert, that someone else was not me. I can still hear the laughter echoing like cheap bells in a convenience store. My vows had barely cooled, and already he'd traded me in for the shinier model, with the shinier bank account. Honestly, it felt like a cosmic joke, the kind of punchline you don't survive. Except, here I am, breathing, smirking, telling you about it. And you, well, you're lucky this is just a story, because if you were in my shoes, you probably wouldn't make it past the first dance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop me a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it over there? I love knowing whose sleepless hours I'm keeping company. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I remember the moment as if someone carved it into the air. His eyes weren't guilty, no, they sparkled like someone who just won the lottery. And me, I was standing there with mascara smudged, feeling like I'd been left out in the rain, except the rain was expensive perfume and whispers of, well, what did you expect? That's the part that stung the most. It wasn't just him, it was everyone around, nodding along, as if betrayal was a reasonable career move. I stumbled home that night, the heels biting into my ankles like tiny, fashionable monsters. The apartment smelled like dust and unopened bills. I sat on the couch, our couch, the one we bought second-hand, because he said we'd upgrade later, and stared at the wallpaper peeling in slow, mocking curls. It's funny how silence becomes louder after your life collapses. My neighbors were clanging pots next door, a baby cried in the hall, and yet all I heard was the hollow rhythm of my own heart. That's when it hit me. I was officially disposable. Tossed aside like an old receipt crumpled at the bottom of a purse. Some historians still argue whether heartbreak is more painful than kidney stones. I haven't had the stones yet, but let me tell you, heartbreak comes with side effects like insomnia, spontaneous crying, and a sudden urge to eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. And yet, somewhere between the tears and the soggy cornflakes, a strange fire sparked. It wasn't anger, at least, not the kind that makes you throw plates. It was quieter, steadier, like a pilot light in the dark. If he could trade up, then so could I, maybe not in husbands, been there, failed that, but in life itself. Of course, at that moment, my bank account looked like a horror movie. I had 3 digits to my name, and one of them was a decimal point. Still, I scribbled in a notebook that night, survive first, succeed later. Not exactly Shakespeare, but hey, it kept me breathing. The days blurred. I took odd jobs, walked through rain with paper resumes that curled at the edges, and answered phones in dingy offices, where the carpet smelled like coffee gone sour. Each paycheck felt like trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon, but it was mine. Mine, not his, not anyone else's. And every tired step forward felt like stitching a new seam in the torn fabric of my pride. I kept a single pair of red shoes tucked in the closet, scuffed but solid. They became my private joke, my talisman. I told myself, one day I'll wear these not because I have to, but because I can. Sounds silly, I know, but sometimes the silliest things are what keep us alive. Looking back now, I can laugh, kind of. At the time, it felt like drowning in slow motion, clinging to driftwood. But that driftwood kept me afloat. And what do they say? If you survive the storm, you learn how to sail. Well, let's just say my storm had a very long, very petty forecast. The first mornings after he left were the worst. I'd wake up and instinctively reach to the other side of the bed, half expecting the warmth of a body that wasn't there anymore. What I found instead was a cold dent in the mattress and the faint smell of his cologne. A cheap knockoff that suddenly felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. It's funny, when love is alive, you don't notice those small sensory details. But when it dies, you become a detective of absence. Every trace becomes evidence. I shuffled into the kitchen one morning, opened the fridge, and found 3 eggs, half a bottle of ketchup, and a jar of pickles that I swear had been there since the Clinton administration. That was breakfast. Eggs and pickles. Not exactly the breakfast of champions, but it was enough to get me to my first job interview. The city felt different with empty pockets. Every advertisement screamed something I couldn't buy. Billboards glowed with promises of vacations, cars, even face creams that claimed to erase not just wrinkles but apparently regrets, too. I remember staring at one of those giant posters and muttering, "Yeah, well, do you erase ex-husbands too?" A man next to me waiting for the bus actually laughed out loud. I think that was the first time I made someone smile after weeks of just surviving. I landed a temp job answering phones for a small law office. The wallpaper there was peeling too. Apparently misery likes interior design. But the paycheck, however meager, kept the lights on. I ate a lot of instant noodles. I even mastered the art of dressing them up with soy sauce packets stolen from Chinese takeout. Gordon Ramsay would have fainted. But hey, it kept me alive. Some historians still debate whether poverty is more exhausting than heartbreak. I'd argue it's the combination of both that deserves a spot in the Guinness World Records. Imagine crying over your ex while also calculating if you can stretch laundry detergent for another week by adding water to the bottle. Spoiler, you can, but the clothes come out smelling like defeat. What kept me going wasn't some grand vision at first. It was tiny, silly victories, like finding a coat in a thrift store that actually had both buttons still attached, or managing to pay rent on time without begging anyone for help. Those wins felt bigger than they should have, and they stitched a little dignity back into me. But dignity doesn't pay for much. I realized quickly that to survive, I needed more than just a job. I needed hustle. I started babysitting on weekends, tutoring kids in English, even baking cookies for a neighbor's church event. My hands were always busy, my back always sore, but my heart was starting to beat with something new. One evening, I collapsed on the couch. My cheap red shoes kicked off at the door. My neighbor's TV was blasting a soap opera in Spanish, and through the thin walls I caught fragments of heartbreak and betrayal that weirdly mirrored my own. Except their betrayal was glamorous, satin gowns, dramatic slaps. Mine was just unpaid bills and greasy hair. Still, I laughed out loud, thinking, if my life were a soap opera, the ratings would be terrible. And yet, something in me stirred. Maybe the drama of it all didn't need to destroy me. Maybe it could fuel me. Maybe I could make my life the kind of story people would actually tune in for. So I wrote another line in my notebook that night. Start small, grow bigger, don't stop. It wasn't poetry, but it was a promise. And promises, unlike vows broken at the altar of money, still meant something to me. The next morning, I picked up every scrap of work I could find. I wore blisters into my hands, carried groceries for strangers, filled in for a receptionist who fainted at work, even sold homemade lemonade to construction workers down the street. Did I feel ridiculous sometimes? Absolutely. But every coin dropped into my purse was a reminder. I was moving forward, one clumsy pickle-scented step at a time. Looking back, I see those years as the foundation. Ugly, uneven, full of cracks, but a foundation nonetheless. Without it, nothing else could have been built. And trust me, something was coming. Something that would turn my eggs and pickles life into something far more palatable. But we're not there yet. First, I had to learn how to crawl through the rubble. Before I could even dream of running, the first place I could truly call my own after the split wasn't glamorous. It was a shoebox apartment with water stains on the ceiling shaped suspiciously like continents. Sometimes I'd lie on my back, stare up, and pretend I was mapping out future travel plans. Paris, New York, maybe even Bali, while in reality, I could barely afford a bus ticket downtown. The room smelled like damp carpet and old cigarettes that had long outlived their smokers. But it had a lock on the door, and that lock was mine. No one could barge in, no one could toss me out. In the grand hierarchy of human needs, safety came right after oxygen, and this tiny cell of an apartment gave me exactly that. I kept my furniture minimal, because, let's face it, minimalism is a chic way of saying I'm broke. A mattress on the floor, one lamp that flickered like it had stage fright, and a second-hand desk with carved initials that didn't belong to me. Honestly, if ghosts existed, I'm pretty sure one of them was still attached to that desk, judging me every time I failed to balance my checkbook. Breakfasts were still tragic. Sometimes it was dry cereal straight from the box. Other times it was canned soup, cold, because the gas company decided I needed to rethink my priorities. Let me tell you, nothing builds character quite like eating chicken noodle soup with a plastic fork. And yet, amid the chaos, my dreams refused to shrink. At night, I'd sit by the window, looking out at the alley where cats fought like tiny gladiators, and I'd imagine myself in tailored suits, stepping out of sleek cars, carrying files that mattered. The fantasy was sharp, almost painful, like staring at a designer dress through a store window, knowing your reflection looks ridiculous next to it. Some historians still argue whether imagination is a blessing or a curse in hard times. For me, it was both. It teased me with a life that felt galaxies away, but it also kept me breathing, like a secret stash of hope I could ration out when things got especially bleak. I started filling notebooks, not just with survive mantras but with ideas, business names, product sketches, half-baked plans that had no grounding in reality. One page even had a doodle of me standing in front of a skyscraper with the caption, "Owned by me, not by him." Honestly, if anyone found those notebooks back then, they would have thought I'd lost my mind. But insanity is underrated. Sometimes delusion is just vision in disguise. Meanwhile, reality demanded rent. I juggled jobs like a circus act, cleaning offices at dawn, tutoring teenagers who rolled their eyes so hard I thought they'd sprain something, and helping a local bakery on weekends. The bakery gig was my favorite. The smell of fresh bread was intoxicating, like therapy you could eat. Plus, the owner, Mrs. Patel, always slipped me an extra roll with a wink. She didn't know it, but she was feeding more than just my stomach. She was feeding the part of me that still believed kindness existed. One night, exhausted from a 12-hour shuffle between jobs, I sank onto my mattress with a sigh so heavy it probably shook the wallpaper loose. My lamp buzzed, the radiator clanked like an old man coughing, and for some reason, it made me laugh. Out loud alone like a lunatic, but in that laugh was a strange acceptance. Okay, so this is my starting line. It's not pretty, but it's mine. I slipped my red shoes back out from under the bed. I hadn't worn them in months. The soles were worn, the color faded, but they still whispered promises. I placed them by the door like sentinels, watching over me. One day I thought, I'll walk out that door in these shoes and step into a life even my ex couldn't buy with all his wife's money. For now, though, I curled up under a thin blanket, listening to the rain ping against the window. It sounded like applause, small, scattered, hesitant, but applause nonetheless. Maybe life wasn't cheering me yet, but it wasn't booing either. And sometimes, silence, or even rain, is enough to carry you into tomorrow. If there's one thing about being broke, it's that you become endlessly creative. My so-called career portfolio was less of a ladder and more of a game of hopscotch across random sidewalks. One week I was tutoring high schoolers in algebra. The next I was handing out flyers on a street corner, pretending not to care when people let them flutter to the ground. Honestly, I got more exercise chasing down my own flyers than from any gym membership I couldn't afford. But then came my first hustle, the kind that felt like it could grow into something bigger. It started with cookies. Mrs. Patel, the bakery owner, had let me experiment with one of her old ovens during off. I whipped up a batch using the cheapest ingredients I could find, half expecting them to taste like sawdust. But when I carried them to the tutoring sessions as a peace offering for the eye-rolling teens, something strange happened. They ate them without complaint. Teens eating cookies without sarcasm. I should have called Guinness. Word spread faster than butter on warm bread. Parents started asking if I could make extras for birthday parties. A secretary at the law office requested a box for her book club. Suddenly, my weekends weren't just about scraping by. They were about baking trays lined with possibility. Of course, my kitchen wasn't exactly food safe certified. The oven's timer was broken. The counter slanted like a funhouse floor, and my smoke detector had developed trust issues. Once, the alarm blared so loudly that my neighbor banged on the wall, shouting, "Stop killing the cat in there." I shouted back, "It's just cookies." The cat yowled as if to confirm otherwise. Still, I leaned into it. I bought thrift store mixing bowls, saved pennies for slightly better chocolate chips, and taught myself design basics on a borrowed laptop to make little labels. The brand Second Chances, because if stale marriages could be traded in, then why not stale cookies for fresh ones? It was cheesy, I know, but every time I slapped that name on a box, I felt like I was stamping hope onto cardboard. Some historians still debate whether failure teaches you more than success. They showed me that people will pay not just for a product but for comfort, sweetness, nostalgia. They reminded me that I had something left to give. The first time I earned $50 from a single order, I celebrated with takeout pizza, extra cheese, no pickles involved. Sitting on my mattress, greasy box on my lap, I thought, this is what winning feels like. Not glamorous, not Instagram worthy, but real. And real was more satisfying than the hollow luxury my ex had chosen. Of course, not everything was smooth. A catering order went wrong when my friend's borrowed car broke down halfway to delivery. I ended up sprinting 6 blocks with a tray of cupcakes, sweating like a marathon runner. By the time I arrived, frosting had slid sideways like a landslide, but the kids devoured them anyway. One even said, "Best cupcakes ever." I nearly cried, then laughed, then cried again. Pro tip: crying while holding a frosting bag is not recommended, but every disaster was a lesson. I was building something, brick by brick, crumb by crumb, even if it didn't look like much yet. My notebooks filled with scribbles, cost calculations, potential recipes, doodles of storefronts I might one day own. The red shoes by my door seemed to smirk at me every morning, as if saying, "See, I told you we'd get somewhere." And at night, when I collapsed onto my mattress, I wasn't just exhausted. I was proud. I'd gone from surviving to hustling, and that shift, tiny as it was, changed everything. The future no longer looked like a void. It looked like a kitchen, filled with sugar, chaos, and a stubborn hope rising slowly, like dough left on the counter overnight. Luck, people say, is just preparation meeting opportunity. Personally, I think luck is sometimes just bumping into the right stranger while carrying a lopsided tray of cookies. That's exactly how it happened for me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was juggling 3 orders at once. My arms wobbled like bad Wi-Fi signals, and I nearly collided with a man stepping out of a cafe. The tray of cookies slid, tilted. Honestly, I saw my entire reputation about to hit the pavement. But he caught it. Not just the tray, me too, in a way. He steadied the cookies and smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who had absolutely never eaten instant noodles for dinner 3 nights in a row. Turns out he wasn't just some random coffee drinker. He worked for an event company. After sampling one of the survivor cookies, as I secretly called them, he said, "We could use someone like you. Ever thought about catering for events?" I almost laughed in his face. Me, cater, with my smoke alarm-phobic oven and mismatched Tupperware. But instead, I said, "Tell me more, because when life hands you crumbs you don't argue, you bake a cake." The first gig was terrifying. A corporate luncheon full of people in suits whose shoes probably cost more than my monthly rent. I wore my thrift store blazer, trying to look like I belonged, while inside I was calculating how many cookies I could drop before anyone noticed. Miraculously, not a single one hit the floor. People actually liked them. One woman even asked for my card. I didn't have one, so I scribbled my number on a napkin like a nervous teenager at prom. Some historians still argue whether the universe rewards boldness or desperation. I say it rewards both, because after that event, the calls started trickling in. Small things at first, baby showers, book clubs, office parties, but each one was a thread weaving into something bigger. Of course, my kitchen still looked like a disaster zone. Picture cracked tiles, a fridge that hummed like it was plotting world domination, and me in an apron with stains I swore were artistic, not culinary. But clients didn't see that. They saw the boxes, the labels, the smiles. They tasted sweetness that carried just enough nostalgia to distract from their office gossip or family drama. And I tasted possibility. I even started keeping a small jar labeled Future Fund. Every time I made a little extra, I'd drop in a few bills. At first it looked pitiful, like pocket change in a pickle jar. But week by week, it grew. Watching that jar fill was better than watching Netflix. Okay, maybe not better, but close. There were still setbacks. Once, I burned an entire batch because I got distracted by an infomercial about a vacuum that promised to suck up your regrets. Spoiler, it didn't. Another time, my neighbor's cat snuck in and licked the frosting. I had to redo everything overnight. By morning, I was a zombie with flour in my hair. But the order got delivered. Barely, but through it all, that fire, the one that sparked the night my husband left, kept glowing. Stronger now, steadier. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, slowly, awkwardly, sometimes hilariously, but building nonetheless. The red shoes by the door started to feel less like a joke and more like a countdown. Every day, I thought, not yet, but soon. And when that day came, I swore I'd step out into a world that had no idea what was about to hit it. The thing about building something from scratch is that it never feels like you're building. It feels like patching leaks on a sinking boat while praying you don't drown. But brick by brick, or in my case, cookie by cookie, I started to see a shape forming out of the chaos. The first real step came when I moved my operation out of my sad little apartment kitchen and into a shared commercial space. Imagine a warehouse chopped into cubicles, except instead of cubicles, it was ovens and prep tables. The rent was terrifying, the contract even more so, but the freedom. Oh, it was intoxicating. Finally, I could bake without worrying the landlord would show up asking why the hall smelled like burnt sugar. The other tenants were a mix of dreamers and eccentrics. A guy making artisanal dog biscuits shaped like bow ties, a woman testing out kombucha flavors that honestly smelled like they were brewed in gym socks, and me, cookies and cakes and an apron that was more patchwork than fabric. We became a strange little family, cheering each other on, stealing each other's spatulas and gossiping about clients like middle school kids. Orders grew. I hired my first helper, a college kid named Maria who worked faster than I could think. She had this habit of humming pop songs while piping frosting, and somehow it made the cookies taste better. Don't ask me how. Science can't explain everything, of course. Not everyone was supportive. My ex's family still lived in the city, and occasionally I'd run into them. Once, his sister spotted me at the farmer's market, handing out samples. She smirked and whispered to her friend loud enough for me to hear, "From wife to cookie seller. What a downgrade." I smiled, handed her a sample, and said, "Careful, it's addictive." The look on her face was worth more than the day's sales. Some historians still argue whether revenge is best served cold. Personally, I think it's best served with chocolate chips. The company I built, still called Second Chances, began appearing in small local magazines. A blurb here, a photo there. Nothing grand, but enough that neighbors started saying, "Hey, I saw your cookies in the paper." My heart swelled every time. Fame wasn't the goal, but recognition. That felt like oxygen. I'll admit though, there were nights when I wanted to quit. When deliveries went wrong, when ovens broke down, when bills piled up faster than I could pay them. Once, after a particularly disastrous day involving a double-booked wedding and a frosting explosion that left me looking like a snowman, I collapsed on the bakery floor and cried. Ugly cried. Maria just handed me a cookie and said, "Eat first, quit later." That girl knew wisdom. I didn't quit, I ate the cookie. And the next morning I got up, tied my apron, and kept going. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about cookies. It was about proving, to him, to his smug new family, to the version of me that almost gave up, that I could build something no one could take away. The red shoes, now a little dustier, still waited by the door. Each night when I came home, I touched them lightly, like a ritual, a reminder that this wasn't the end. This was just brick number 50 in a wall that would one day tower over all the doubts, smirks, and betrayals. Success has a funny way of sneaking up on you. One day you're hustling to deliver cookies in the rain, praying your cheap umbrella doesn't betray you. The next, you're sitting across from a corporate executive in a glass-walled office, signing a contract to supply desserts for their employee cafe. That contract changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just a small-town baker, I was the owner of a growing business. We had to expand production, hire more staff, and upgrade equipment. Overnight, my messy little dream transformed into an operation with payrolls, schedules, and spreadsheets. Numbers became as crucial as recipes. I hated numbers, but I learned to dance with them anyway. Of course, with growth comes shadows. I had taken on a business partner early in the journey, a man named Victor, charming in that polished shoe, firm handshake kind of way. He believed in my vision, invested capital when I had none, and opened doors to clients I couldn't have reached alone. At first, he felt like a miracle. Later, I'd realize he was more like a wolf dressed in a suit. Victor wanted faster growth, bigger risks, and bolder moves. He didn't understand that my business wasn't just flour and sugar. It was my blood, my survival. When he started pushing for corners to be cut, for cheaper ingredients and outsourced labor, I pushed back. That's when the cracks appeared. One night, I walked into the kitchen and found him arguing with Maria. His voice was low, sharp, the kind that slices more than it shouts. She was near tears. I stepped in, my apron still dusted with powdered sugar, and told him flat out, "No one talks to my team like that." He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound, and muttered, "You'll thank me when you're rich." But money without integrity wasn't why I started. I didn't crawl out of heartbreak and humiliation just to become someone else's puppet. I confronted him, and the fallout was ugly. Lawyers got involved. Bank accounts were frozen. For weeks, I lived on instant noodles again, terrified everything I'd built was about to collapse. And yet, like every storm before, I survived it. I bought out his shares, emptied my savings, and clawed my way back. The company was scarred but still alive. The team stood by me. Maria, bless her, said, "We'd rather work for someone stubborn with morals than rich with none." Looking back, Victor was a test, not just of my resilience, but of my vision. He forced me to decide what kind of empire I wanted to build, one rooted in greed, or one rooted in grit. I chose grit. Meanwhile, whispers about my ex's family started to reach me. The wealthy in-laws he married into, not so wealthy anymore. A failed investment, a downturn, and suddenly their empire wasn't so untouchable. It wasn't bankruptcy yet, but it was enough to shake their perfect porcelain facade. The universe has an impeccable sense of timing. As my company recovered, stabilized, and even thrived, his family's glossy reputation began to crack. I didn't gloat, not out loud, but in the quiet of my apartment, with the red shoes at my feet, I allowed myself a smile, because life, I realized, isn't a straight climb. It's a series of falls and rises, betrayals and rebuilds. And for every storm I weathered, I grew stronger. For every person who underestimated me, I added another brick to my wall. One day, that wall would be high enough that no one could look down on me again. The first time I tasted victory, it was sweeter than any frosting I had ever made. Not because it was grand or flashy, but because it was mine, earned crumb by crumb, hour by hour. It came in the form of a wedding order. Not just any wedding either, a high-profile event, with guests who carried business cards heavier than my entire resume. The bride had found my bakery through word of mouth, swearing she wanted something authentic, not mass-produced. I didn't even own enough cake stands for the job, but I said yes. Sometimes courage looks like lying through your teeth and figuring it out later. That order nearly killed me. We baked for 3 days straight. I slept on the bakery floor, using bags of flour as pillows. Maria decorated sugar roses until her hands cramped. But when the bride saw the cake, 5 tiers of buttercream, gold leaf accents, flowers cascading like a waterfall, her eyes welled up. She hugged me, whispered, "It's perfect," and slipped an envelope into my hand. Inside was a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen attached to my name. For the first time, my bank account wasn't gasping for air. I paid off debts, gave bonuses to my tiny staff, and even upgraded the delivery van so we no longer had to pray it wouldn't stall at every red light. That night, I bought a bottle of cheap champagne, and we toasted with paper cups among the scent of vanilla and dish soap. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like standing on top of the world. Then came the articles. A glossy magazine featured our wedding cake on its cover, calling it a triumph of artistry and flavor. Local news stations wanted to do interviews. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Brides, corporations, event planners, all wanting a taste of what we made. That's when I realized, this wasn't just survival anymore, this was success. And oh, how it tasted. But success, like sugar, has its risks. Too much, and it can rot the core. With every order that grew larger, every client that demanded more, the pressure mounted. I was no longer the underdog baker scraping together rent. I was the owner of a business everyone expected perfection from. Mistakes weren't just mistakes anymore. They were scandals waiting to happen. Still, each challenge came with its rewards. The day I signed the lease for a storefront, a real bakery, with windows and a sign above the door, I stood on the sidewalk and cried. People passing by must have thought I was insane, but they didn't know the years behind that moment. The rejection, the heartbreak, the ramen dinners, the red shoes sitting by my bed like silent witnesses. When we opened, the line stretched down the block. Customers snapped photos of their lattes and cupcakes, tagging us online. My little bakery became a destination, and then, inevitably, he walked in, my ex. It was a weekday morning, the shop buzzing with chatter and clinking cups. When I looked up from the counter and saw him, he hadn't changed much. Same confident stride, same too-white smile, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, a shadow of uncertainty. He approached the counter, pretending not to notice me, and ordered a coffee. I rang him up like any other customer. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. Inside, my heart pounded like a drum, but outside, I was all poised. He glanced at me finally, recognition dawning. His lips parted as if to speak, but I simply slid his receipt across the counter and said, "Next customer, please." For the first time, I realized something vital. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. The victory was already mine, baked into every cookie, frosted into every cake, rising like bread in the oven of my life. That night, when I went home, I slipped my feet into the red shoes. They no longer pinched, they fit. The world has a funny way of keeping score. You think you've already won, and then life throws you a bonus round. After my bakery took off, opportunities multiplied like sprinkles scattered on a countertop. Catering for galas, collaborating with local artists, even teaching workshops where I tried not to laugh when someone managed to burn meringue. Yes, burn meringue. I built a reputation not just as a baker, but as someone who turned sugar and flour into an experience. Clients didn't just want cake, they wanted the story behind it. They wanted me. And then came the call that shifted everything. A chain hotel reached out. They were opening a luxury branch in the city and wanted me to create the dessert menu. I nearly dropped the phone. Me, the girl once dismissed as disposable, who counted coins for bus fare. Now executives in tailored suits were pitching me. I said yes, of course. My accountant nearly fainted at the figures in the contract. With that money, I expanded the bakery into a flagship store, complete with an upstairs event space. The new kitchen gleamed like something out of a dream. Shiny mixers, spotless counters, and ovens that purred instead of growled. Even the smell of fresh paint felt like success. But here's the part no one tells you. Success is loud. Phones ring endlessly. Emails multiply faster than you can delete them. And people start crawling out of the woodwork, claiming they always believed in you. Some nights I'd collapse on the couch, still in my flour-stained apron, wondering if peace was now a luxury item I couldn't afford. It was during one of those overwhelming weeks that fate twisted the knife. I received an invitation in the mail, gold embossed and perfumed. A wedding, his son's wedding, my ex-husband's son, who wasn't mine, of course, but the product of his new marriage. The irony dripped off the envelope like syrup. At first I laughed, then I sat in silence, staring at the invite. Why would they even send it to me? A cruel joke, a misguided attempt at civility. Or maybe, just maybe, an underestimation of how far I'd come. Maria found me with the invitation in hand. "Are you going?" she asked, her eyebrow arched like she already knew the answer. "I don't know," I admitted. The thought of walking into that crowd, surrounded by the very people who once smirked at my downfall, made my stomach twist. But another part of me, a louder, braver part, was curious. What if I showed them the woman I'd become? What if the girl in red shoes walked into their world not as a discarded wife, but as someone they could never ignore again? That night I made a decision. I would attend. Not for him, not for them, but for me. To stand in that gilded room, not as the ghost of who I was, but as proof of who I am. Of course, outfits became the next crisis. Historical fact. Women have spent centuries debating what to wear to events they don't even want to attend. Some historians still argue about whether Cleopatra wore pearls to dinner simply to flex on Rome. I, however, settled on a sleek black dress paired with, yes, the red shoes. They'd become more than footwear. They were my silent anthem. On the day of the wedding, I arrived in a car that hummed quietly, nothing ostentatious, but dignified. The venue sparkled with chandeliers and violins. Guests mingled in designer gowns, sipping champagne. As I entered, I could feel eyes turning, whispers floating like smoke. Some faces flickered with recognition, others with disbelief. And then I saw him, my ex, standing tall, older now, with threads of gray streaking his hair. His wife at his side, dripping diamonds. Their son, the groom, smiling nervously near the altar. Our eyes met across the room. He blinked once, twice, as though he'd seen a ghost. But no, I wasn't a ghost. I was the storm he never saw coming, and in that moment I smiled. Not wide, not forced, just enough to say, "Look at me now." Walking into that wedding felt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't auditioned for, yet somehow already owned. Every chandelier sparkled like a spotlight. Every curious glance was an audience waiting for my next move. Funny how a room filled with strangers can feel like a courtroom when your past is present. I kept my shoulders back, my steps measured. The red shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, announcing me without a word. I could feel his wife's eyes on me, measuring, calculating, maybe even bristling. She looked beautiful, of course, dripping in jewels, but beauty can sometimes be brittle, like glass ready to crack under pressure. I found a seat near the middle, deliberately not hiding in the back. If I was going to be there, I would be seen. The ceremony unfolded with the usual pomp, whispered prayers, soft music, a few sniffles from relatives, pretending it was allergies. I let myself drift, not on the words, but on the weight of the moment. 20 years ago, I'd been left for this family. 20 years ago, they bet against me. Now here I was, not as a footnote, but as a headline walking among them. During the reception, I wandered to the dessert table, because of course I did. Rows of pastries lined up like soldiers, macarons, miniature tarts. They were exquisite, crafted by a well-known catering company. I sampled a tart, polite smile fixed on my face, but inside I thought I could do better in my sleep, which wasn't arrogance, just fact. Some historians still debate whether Napoleon ever truly said, "An army marches on its stomach." I'd argue it's true, because nothing makes you feel more invincible than knowing you feed people joy, one bite at a time. Eventually, the inevitable happened. My ex approached me. He moved carefully, like a man navigating a minefield. His smile was tentative, his voice lower than I remembered. "It's been a long time," he said. I took a sip of champagne before answering. It has the bubbles tickled my throat, but my words were smooth, unshaken. "You look, well." His eyes flicked briefly to my shoes, and I wondered if he remembered buying them all those years ago, or if they were just another forgotten trinket in his trail of discarded things. "I am well," I replied simply. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. My presence, my dress, my quiet confidence did all the explaining. He hesitated, searching for something else to say, but the silence between us stretched like a taut rope. Finally, he excused himself, muttering something about greeting other guests. I let him walk away. Revenge wasn't in the confrontation, it was in the fact that he had nothing left to say that mattered. Later, His son, the groom, came over. He was polite, almost shy, thanking me for coming. He confessed he'd heard about my bakery, that he and his had even considered ordering from me but worried it might be awkward. I laughed, genuinely, and wished him happiness. Whatever mistakes his father made, the son didn't owe me those ghosts. The night wore on, the music louder, the laughter echoing, and through it all I felt a strange lightness. I had walked into their world, not as an intruder, but as proof that survival can look like elegance, that resilience can wear red shoes. When I finally left, stepping into the cool night air, the stars above seemed to shimmer just for me. The past no longer felt like chains, but like stepping stones that had led me here. And as the car pulled away, I whispered to myself, I won. The wedding faded behind me like a dream dissolving in daylight, but its echoes lingered. For days, I replayed the scenes in my head, not out of bitterness, but with a curious detachment, like watching an old movie where I already knew the ending. He had looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in present. Or maybe I had simply outgrown the scale I once measured him by. Back at the bakery, life surged on. Orders piled in, the phone buzzing with new opportunities. But success wasn't just about cakes anymore. It was about expansion, about stepping beyond the flour-dusted walls and into something larger. That's when an investor approached me. He'd been a guest at the wedding, apparently. My red shoes left quite an impression. He walked into my bakery one morning, ordered a coffee, and casually suggested, "Have you ever thought about franchising?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled whipped cream all over his suit. Franchising? Me? The woman who once stretched a single bag of sugar across a week. But as he laid out numbers and projections, a seed planted itself in my mind. Why not? If I could build one thriving bakery, why not 10? The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Growth meant risk. Risk meant failure lurking in the shadows. But wasn't that what life had always been? One long gamble, with heartbreak and hope rolling dice in the background. So I said yes. We opened a second location within a year, then a third. Each one carried the same signature touches. The warm lighting, the faint hum of jazz, the smell of butter and vanilla wrapping around you like a hug. Customers didn't just come for sweets. They came for comfort, for belonging. I hired more staff, built a management team, learned to delegate. Let me tell you, delegating is harder than baking a croquemach without swearing. Some historians still argue whether Julius Caesar lost more sleep over battles or paperwork. I'd wager it was paperwork. Running a business empire is 90% logistics, 10% glamour, but the payoff was undeniable. My name became known not just in the city but beyond. Articles described me as a self-made visionary. TV segments showed me whisking batter while talking about resilience. Once, a little girl came up to me shyly and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." That moment melted me faster than chocolate left in the sun. And yet, success has a funny echo. The more visible I became, the more whispers returned from the past. Old acquaintances slid into my inbox, pretending we'd always been close. Even distant relatives suddenly remembered my birthday. Some asked for money, others for business advice, which usually translated to money in disguise. I handled it with grace, mostly, sometimes with sarcasm, always with boundaries, because I had learned, not everyone clapping for you wants you to win. Through it all, the red shoes stayed by my bedside. They had traveled from symbols of loss to talismans of triumph. Whenever I doubted myself, I'd slip them on, feel the leather mold around me, and remember the girl who refused to give up. By the time my business hit its 10th anniversary, I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. My ex's world, glittering and loud, seemed almost quaint compared to mine. I didn't chase his validation anymore. I didn't need his acknowledgement, but deep down, I knew our paths would cross again. Success doesn't just shine, it casts shadows, and in those shadows, the past waits patiently. The thing about anniversaries is they force reflection, whether you want it or not. My bakery empire turning 10 years old felt surreal. 10 years since that first wedding cake nearly broke me. 10 years since I cried over bills while scrubbing frosting off my apron. 10 years since I swore I'd never let anyone define my worth again. We celebrated with a gala, Yes, a gala. Imagine me, once sneaking day-old bread for dinner, now hosting an event with chandeliers, champagne towers, and a guest list that read like a social directory. The irony wasn't lost on me. I even laughed at myself when the caterer asked if I wanted gold-trimmed napkins. I said no, paper napkins absorb wine spills better. Some historians still argue whether Marie Antoinette ever actually said, "Let them eat cake." But I can confirm, fancy napkins don't save a dress. The gala was a blur of speeches, photos, and clinking glasses. I wore a gown stitched with tiny crystals that caught the light like stars. And yes, the red shoes. Always the red shoes. By midnight, I stood near the stage, microphone in hand, looking out at the crowd that once would have intimidated me. Now, they looked back not with doubt, but with admiration. I told my story, briefly, not the messy details, but the heart of it. How loss became fuel, how a broken heart turned into a recipe for resilience. People clapped, some even cried. When the applause roared, I thought of the night I lay on my bakery floor, too tired to move, and smiled. That exhausted girl had gotten us here. And then, as if scripted by fate, he appeared again, my ex. I spotted him across the room, older, slower, his once proud posture softened by time. He wasn't invited, at least, not by me. Later, I learned he'd come as a guest of a guest. The kind of man who still maneuvered himself into rooms he didn't quite belong in. For a moment, our eyes locked. I braced myself, half annoyed, half curious. He approached cautiously, weaving through the crowd until he stood a few feet away. "You've done well," he said, voice low, almost grudging. "Better than well," I replied, not unkindly, just truthfully. He nodded, lips pressed thin. I didn't think. His words trailed off. That I'd survive, I finished for him, raising an eyebrow. He didn't answer, but his silence was louder than any confession. The weight of his choices, the life he'd built elsewhere, seemed to hang over him like an ill-fitted coat. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, I felt pity. We talked briefly, surface level, nothing more. He congratulated me, I thanked him, and then he drifted away, swallowed by the crowd. Later, Maria leaned over and whispered, "Want me to kick him out?" I laughed so hard, champagne nearly came out of my nose. "No," I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "Let him stay, let him see." That night, after the gala ended, I went home, slipped off the gown, and sat in my kitchen with a slice of leftover cake. No cameras, no applause, just me and the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about how success often feels loud in public, but in private, it tastes like quiet satisfaction. And as I licked frosting off my fork, I realized I no longer needed to prove anything, not to him, not to the world. I had already proven it to myself. There's a funny calm that comes after the storm of success, not the quiet of emptiness, but the kind that feels like sitting on a porch after rain, watching the puddles reflect the sky. My empire was steady now, my name carved into the local culture, my shoes still red, still radiant, tucked neatly by the door. For once, I wasn't scrambling, I was living. I started doing things I never had time for before. I traveled, though I couldn't resist sneaking into bakeries abroad to sample their work. Paris gave me croissants that flaked like whispers. Tokyo gave me desserts so precise they looked engineered. And Rome gave me gelato that tasted like pure mischief. Each trip fed my imagination, and sometimes my waistband, but who's counting? Back home, I invested in community programs, baking classes for kids, scholarships for culinary students, partnerships with local farmers. Giving back felt better than any paycheck. Seeing a child beam at their first batch of cookies reminded me why ID started in the first place. Flour, sugar, hope. That was my trinity. And yet, even in peace, ghosts linger. One morning I found an envelope slipped under the bakery's door. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. His handwriting, my ex. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter. No grand apologies, no begging. Just a few sentences, shaky and uneven. "I see what you've built. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I didn't believe in you when it mattered. Life turned out differently than I expected. I hope, truly, that you're happy. I read it twice, then a third time. My first reaction was laughter, not cruel, just incredulous. After 20 years, that was it, a scribbled acknowledgement on paper. But then something shifted. I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was free. His words were a relic, a museum piece from a past that no longer ruled me. I tucked the letter into a drawer, not out of sentiment, but closure, like keeping an old receipt, proof of a transaction long settled. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant. The city stretched out below me, glittering like sugar crystals under moonlight. I sipped wine, let the breeze tangle my hair, and felt the weight of 20 years lift. Some historians still argue about what defines success: money, fame, legacy. I think it's simpler. Success is sitting in peace with yourself, knowing you didn't give up, knowing you created something beautiful out of brokenness. As the waiter cleared my plate, I slipped my feet out of the red shoes under the table. The leather was worn now, the heels scuffed, but they were mine. They had carried me through fire and into freedom, and for the first time, I thought, maybe it's time to buy a new pair. Not to replace them, but to honor them. To remind myself that journeys don't end, they evolve. Buying those new shoes felt almost ceremonial. I walked into a boutique, quiet, minimal, smelling faintly of leather and lavender, and asked the clerk to show me something bold. She brought out a pair of emerald green heels, glossy and unapologetic. They weren't just shoes, they were a declaration. If the red pair carried my survival, these green ones would carry my growth. I didn't throw the old pair away. Of course not. They sat in a glass case in my office, like artifacts in a personal museum. Visitors often asked about them, and I'd smile, telling the short version of the story. The shoes became a symbol, not of pain, but of possibility. Meanwhile, the bakery empire thrived. We expanded internationally. London, Singapore, Sydney. Each opening was a blur of ribbon cuttings and camera flashes. I traveled constantly, shaking hands, sampling pastries, giving interviews. I was exhausted, yes, but in the best way. The kind of tired that comes from living fully. Then came an unexpected twist. An award nomination, not for baking, but for entrepreneurship. I was up against tech moguls, fashion designers, people whose businesses didn't leave you smelling like vanilla at the end of the day. The gala was televised, glitzy, the kind of event where you rehearse your gracious loser face, just in case. I wore the green shoes that night. On stage, under the heat of the lights, I heard my name announced as the winner. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, and for a second I felt like that girl again, standing in a kitchen too small for her dreams, trying not to cry over bills. Only this time, I wasn't alone. My team rushed the stage afterward, hugging me, laughing, one of them nearly knocking the award out of my hands. I couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just my win, it was ours. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew who else was watching. My ex by then. I'd heard whispers of his decline, bad investments, a strained marriage, health troubles. The man who once seemed untouchable was unraveling quietly. I didn't gloat. Life has a way of humbling us all, and I'd had my share of humility. But there was symmetry in it, undeniable as the ticking of a clock. After the gala, as I sat in the hotel suite with my shoes kicked off and makeup smudged, I laughed to myself. Success wasn't a straight line, it was a messy recipe, with lumps and burns and the occasional miracle rise. And here I was, proof that sometimes the cake doesn't collapse, even when the oven seems stacked against you. Some historians still argue whether history repeats itself. I think it rhymes. My story didn't loop back to where it began. It evolved into a verse I never expected to sing. And as I drifted to sleep that night, award on the nightstand, shoes by the bed, I felt something deeper than triumph. I felt peace. Peace, however, is never the final chapter. It's a pause, a gentle comma in a sentence that insists on running forward. A few months after the award gala, I received an invitation I couldn't ignore. My hometown, where the whispers had once suffocated me, where my ex and I had lived in a shoebox apartment, was hosting a cultural festival. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker. The irony was sharp enough to slice bread. I'd left that town with nothing but debt and humiliation, yet now they were rolling out a red carpet. I accepted, not out of spite, but because something inside me wanted to close that loop, to walk through the fire again, this time without burning. When I arrived, the streets looked smaller, the houses older, as if time had shrunk them. The auditorium was packed, students, old neighbors, familiar faces that once looked away when I passed. And yes, he was there, my ex, in the second row, older, grayer, shoulders slouched, but still recognizable. I stepped onto the stage in my green heels, microphone in hand, and felt an entire lifetime press against my ribs. My speech wasn't rehearsed, it flowed like water, raw and steady. I talked about failure, resilience, the long nights when hope was thinner than paper. I spoke of shoes, red and green, as metaphors for survival and growth. But I didn't mention revenge, not once. Because by then, I knew true revenge wasn't in speeches or spotlights. It was in living well, in building a life so radiant that the past couldn't dim it. When I finished, the applause shook the room. People stood. Some cried. And in the second row, my ex clapped too. Slowly, but genuinely. Our eyes met for half a second. No hatred, no longing, just acknowledgement. The kind you give someone who shared a chapter of your story, but no longer defines its ending. Afterward, I slipped outside, away from the cameras, into the quiet night. The festival lights glittered across the town square, music floating in the air. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed at me. "That's the lady from the bakery," she whispered, eyes wide. I crouched down, smiling. "Do you like cake?" I asked. She nodded fiercely, then promised me this: never stop dreaming, even if people laugh. Especially if they laugh. She grinned, missing a front tooth, and my heart swelled. As I walked back to the car, my heels clicking against the cobblestone, I realized something profound. My life wasn't a revenge story anymore. It was a legacy story. And that, more than anything, was what the shoes had carried me toward all along. The past was done. The future was wide open. And I was ready, heels, heart, and all. Now, let your mind drift with me, slow and soft, like the last amber rays of sun slipping behind a quiet horizon. The streets are emptying, the city hums gently beneath you, and the scent of vanilla and butter lingers in the air as if it were a memory. Every step you take is lighter now, the weight of old grudges fading like the faint echo of a distant melody. Imagine the red shoes and green heels side by side, relics and symbols of a journey that stretched from heartbreak to triumph. Feel the texture of the leather, worn yet steadfast, reminding you that resilience leaves its mark not in perfection, but in perseverance. The echoes of laughter, the hum of ovens, the gentle whisper of triumph over pain, they all mingle in this calm twilight, soothing your thoughts and letting tension unwind. Breathe slowly, in and out. Let the years of struggle dissolve into a quiet warmth. The girl who once doubted herself, who crawled through nights of tears and failure, now smiles gently in the corner of your mind. You can almost hear her whisper, "You made it, and it's beautiful." As your eyelids grow heavy, picture the city's lights dimming one by one, leaving only a soft glow in your heart. Every corner of the journey, the betrayals, the long nights, the victories small and great, settle like dust, peaceful and iridescent. The hum of life becomes a lullaby, and you feel the gentle pulse of contentment. Let your breaths slow further, let the world soften. The story has been told, and for tonight, it rests here. Carry the warmth, the courage, and the quiet power forward into your dreams. And as you drift deeper, hear the whisper of the red shoes, the green heels, and the unwavering heartbeat of someone who survived, thrived, and finally rested.